Episode 27, Changing the Food System for the Better with Dan Kittredge.
Welcome to Thriving with Nature, a podcast that gives you the tools you need to live a modern lifestyle that helps regenerate our planet. And now your host, Hayley Weatherburn.
Hello, Thrivers, and welcome to this week's episode. I am really excited to share with you a special guest this week. We have Dan Kittredge of the Bionutrient Association. Thank you so much for joining us, Dan.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thrivers, I just wanted to give you some context to what we're going to talk a little bit about this week. Something that really sparked my desire to have Dan on this podcast is the fact that he really likes to pinpoint on food quality. We can get all caught up with, is it permaculture? Is it biodynamic? Is it regenerative? Is it organic? What's the word? But at the end of the day, we need to focus on getting high nutrient food. That's the purpose. So who is Dan Kittredge? For those of you who have never heard of this amazing man, Dan Kittredge has been doing organic farming for 30 plus years. Is that approximately correct?
I grew up on an organic farm. My parents got certified in '86, I think.
Yeah, so, wow.
Yeah, I mean,
fully certified. And of course, he's the founder and executive director of the Bionutrient Food Association, which is it's a non-profit organization. Is that correct? It's a
charitable non-profit educational organization. Yep.
Yeah, and we'll get into what I'm about to say, but he is part of something that I think is going to revolutionize the food system in regards to measuring the food nutrients in our food. So I'm going to get to that in a minute because that's really exciting and that's why he's here. But Dan, I wanted to ask you, I first heard about you at the soil advocacy training through Kiss the Ground with this amazing Bionutrient Meter, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what sparked your desire to pinpoint we need to look at the nutrient in the food? What took you, how did you get to that point?
That's a long, you have the long, medium, or short answer to that question.
whatever you feel.
And how far off the deep end am I allowed to go? Yeah, well, the sort of the most sort of safe 3D answer to that question. When I got married and started trying to farm for a living to provide for a family, I'd been sort of through my 20s managing my parents' farm and spring, summer, and fall, and then traveling the world in the winter, and really, didn't need much and wasn't making much, and that was fine. But then when I got married and I had basically developed no other skill sets to provide for a family than farming, I started to think about the logistics of actually, being a breadwinner, and in short order came to the conclusion that actually I wasn't a good enough farmer to make enough money to provide for a family. And so I think, like many farmers, there's a struggle there about economic viability. And my parents had been and still do run an organic farming organization called NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming Association. It's 40 plus years old, and it's one of the sort of leaders in the movement here in North America. And so, I not only grew up on an organic farm, but my parents ran an organic farming organization. And I thought, if I couldn't make a living farming, maybe there's more to it. With that kind of background, I should be able to at least make a living. So long story short, I, looked at the fact that because the plants were sick, my yields were limited. Insects attacking a plant is not a sign of a plant being healthy. Fungus infestations attacking a plant is not a sign of a plant being healthy. It may be normal, but it's not healthy. And it doesn't happen in nature. And so what I had normalized, which was pest and disease pressure, I would say was a sign of actual poor health. And so starting with that humility, hopefully, of like, maybe I actually don't know as much as I thought I did, or maybe organic isn't as great as I was told it was. I started going to workshops and conferences and reading books and, experimenting different practices, staying within the organic structure, but sort of trying to learn more about what was actually going on. And, foundationally, what I understood is that plants evolved in nature with the capacity to feed themselves through their gut flora, the sort of the microbes in the soil. The plants make sugar, they inject it into the soil to feed the microbes. The microbes eat it, digest it, reproduce, go about digesting the soil, make nutrients available, feed it back up to the plant. There's this beautiful virtuous circle that is how nature evolved it hundreds of millions of years ago, and has been working just fine with no tillage and no fertilizer, in lots of places. So really the issue was that I had been, following a practice of, fairly destructive techniques, which has, if you look back over history, really worn out a lot of the world's land. And even though we weren't using chemicals, we still were engaging in destructive practices. And so effectively, when I started to change practices and the plants became healthier, the pest and disease pressure went away, the yields went up, the cost of production went down, economic viability increased, things like flavor and shelf life and aroma increased, soil health, soil organic matter, all these things improved. And so I said, wow, I grew up in the organic movement. I didn't know any of these things. This is massive, because here I am able to make a living working 20 hours a week on the farm. And then I felt almost a responsibility to start sharing, and, so did start to teach workshops and courses, and effectively started an organization, and looking more deeply at leverage, what is the structure of the culture? What's the structure of the food supply? In my 20s, I did a lot of sort of, organizing and political stuff and deep thinking, and, I want to save the world. I want to do something of consequence. What is it that I can do? Everything's going the wrong direction. And I came to the realization that there seems to be some really intrinsic connection between plant health, soil health, environmental health, farming, and food quality. Nutrient density is the term we use now to sort of roughly refer to it. Organic claims to be better, local claims to be better, permaculture claims to be better, or, whatever, biodynamic claims to be better. What is better? Everybody can claim it, but we don't actually have an empirical metric for assessing it. And so, that's what got me into it, was seeing as a farmer that actually I could make a living, and I didn't need all these products, and it was beneficial for the environment, and it was healthier for my customers and my children. That seems like something that I can do to focus on that actually is a systemic solution that maybe other people would be interested in also.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for sharing. It's,
that's not the whole thing, but that's enough.
No. I appreciate it. It's so interesting, and I've interviewed a few people now. Dr. Elaine Ingham, the Soil Food Web. Charles Massey, who's an Australian regenerative agriculture. There's quite a few people that have gone through this journey of having sort of one understanding, but then realizing that we can, and this was my journey at the soil advocacy training, this sudden drop of, actually, if we just go regenerative, if we follow nature and it brings back the nutrients and the microbes and everything together, not only is it starting to thrive in your actual, rather than the normal monocrops where things get worse and worse and worse and worse, and you've got to put more injections in, things are getting better and more thriving, and you're becoming more profitable because the cost is low, and the nutrients are getting higher. It's like it's too good to be true. This, if we just align with nature.
It's an octuple bottom line, right? I mean,
Tuple, I like that.
there's so many symbiotic benefits that occur when you work with nature. The thing is, you have to be able to work with nature.
Yes.
And it requires a total shift in your mindset, you know, from this colonized, patriarchal, whatever you want to call it, sort of power over, like we will command you, nature, what to do, to a like receptive, humble, you know, indigenous, like, okay, what's the path? What's the pattern? What am I being called to do right now? It's a paradigm shift. And so that's the struggle is, you know, I think Arden Anderson, one of the elders in the movement, always said the biggest block is between the ears.
It's so true.
It's not hard to transform land in very short order. It's not expensive. It's really, really easy, but you have to know what you're doing, and you have to be humble and receptive. And that's the issue. And yeah, I mean, foundationally right now, a lot of farming is, even though farmers, I think, are getting more and more receptive to this, the economics are what drive them. And you know, we have the all the money from the government and the insurance companies, and the, you know, there's a structure that they're basically not forced to be in, but it's really hard to disengage from it. And so if it's money that's really pushing this structure, how can we use money to push the biological structure? And that's where the focus on nutrient density comes in, and basically giving consumers and anybody in the supply chain the ability to say, look, this is in the 85th percentile, this bag of carrots, and look, this one over here is in the 20th percentile. You know, why would I choose the 20th percentile one, which tastes worse, is less nutritious, costs the same? Why would I do that? There's no reason to do that. But we're all we just kind of think that wheat and milk and carrots and cucumbers, like metal and plastic, are uniform. And the thing is, they're not.
No.
The variation is hundreds or thousands of percent, not 50%, but like 5 to 1 or 10 to 1. Like this carrot has 10 times as much iron as that carrot, or this leaf of spinach has 15 times as much copper as that leaf of spinach, or 75 times as many polyphenols as that leaf of spinach. I mean, it's the nutrient variation in food is massive. And that's the thing that no one's ever bothered to document. There's not really a strong industrial incentive to do that science. And so that's part of our work, is to sort of say, okay, we understand that variation exists, but nobody's looked. So we're going to go and start looking. And so we've built a lab, and we've started working with growers across North America, now into Europe, and got multiple labs. And we're basically saying, you know, send stuff in, tell us how, you know, what did you do? Send the soil in too, so we can check the organic matter and biological activity, and let's start looking at this thing. And then we built a little gizmo, and you flash the light at the crop, and lo and behold, you know, you can see the variation. So
let's talk about. So let's talk about this little gizmo. It's called, I think you've sort of named it a bionutrient meter. Is that correct?
Been shy of any proper marketing or thought about what to call it. Yeah, we're not that.
Give it some gimmicky name. But I think bionutrient meter is good. It's a spectrometer. So can you tell people who've never even heard of it? I'm going to share my screen and show a little picture from your website of it for those who are watching on YouTube. Okay. Or have you actually got one right there?
I think I've got one up there. I can get it. Yeah, if you want.
Okay, that'd be amazing. That's even better. I was going to just show the website. In fact, you've got one live on camera. Special.
Special.
So if you want to share, what is this bionutrient meter and what does it do?
Yeah. Well, so what is a spectrometer? I like to use the example of Alpha Centauri, which is a star, which is, you know, a few light years away, which is, I think, the closest star to us. And if you ask an astrophysicist what Alpha Centauri is made up of, they'll tell you, well, it's 51% hydrogen, it's 48% helium, it's 1% other gases in these specific levels and ratios. And you're like, how did you figure that out? Because Alpha Centauri's 5 light years away. And the farthest we've ever sent a probe, one of the Voyagers, is like just past the edge of the solar system, which is 12 light hours away. So how do you know what something 5 light years away is made up of, much less something that's 10 billion light years away, which is where we're getting pictures of. And the way you figure it out, basically the idea is that every element in chemistry, like copper or zinc, is a vibration in physics. So copper vibrates at a certain frequency, zinc vibrates at a certain frequency, and so that vibration is light. So if you take a picture of the light coming off of Alpha Centauri and you parse it out, you can see how much is the light of hydrogen, how much is the light of helium, etc. And that's spectroscopy is the science, and it's decades old. And our thought is, if we can read what something 5 light years away is made up of, can we read what something 2 millimeters away is made up of?
Yeah, wow.
Would we be able to, on principle, be able to actually assess?
It's a great hypothesis. Yes.
And the answer is yes, actually we can. And so, I grew up, my parents helped write some of the first organic standards here in North America, as through their organization, long before the government came in and took over the word. And at this point, we can say that there's a lot of things that have an organic label on them that are not grown in harmony with nature. And so our question is, how do we go beyond a process standard, which basically says, don't use these things and you get this certification, or grow within a 30-mile radius and you get this label? Like, you can do a lot of things. You can grow crops poorly and still get these kinds of labels, which is really not what people are looking for. So
it's like having a fake food. Like, yes, it's made these marks, but it's like, I'm going to eat it. Is it still going to give me the benefits?
Not most of them. I mean, better than a Snickers bar or potato chips, probably, but still not actually vitalizing anywhere near to the degree it could be for yourself or for the environment it grew in.
Exactly.
We are actually responsible for our actions. And if you buy, GMO soy or something, a Impossible Burger, right? I mean, that was grown in a way that was destructive to the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Period.
It's not regenerative.
So deal with it. Not to mention the fact that it was genetically modified bacteria, which, blah, 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 blah. So
a whole nother conversation. Yeah.
Let's have some empirical transparency about, the effect of how it was grown and what it is that you have available to you. So we want to go beyond a certification system to a direct assessment process where you don't have to trust anybody because you've got the ability to check yourself.
Yeah.
And so,
which naturally raises the bar, because this is where we as the laymen, as the people, the customers, can vote with our dollar. And if we start paying for products that are highly nutritious over ones that aren't, guess where businesses are going to have to move towards?
That's exactly the insight, is that money is power, and you vote every 4 years, whatever it is in your country, however many years you vote, but on a daily basis, most people spend money for food. Yeah. And so if we can help them make that really small choice of this bag of carrots versus that bag of carrots, this jug of milk versus that jug of milk, these are practical things people will do that actually can have a powerful impact on the climate and on their health and the health of their children, on their vitality. I would say your consciousness, we can go into all kinds of different rabbit holes in this topic, but this is a way to facilitate empowerment towards the solutions you want, as opposed to fighting the problems. And that's part of our sort of foundational framework. So it changes the standard. It changes the expectation. I mean, I've heard of, food being injected with water or something so it's heavier, and
There's all those weird things that you've seen out there, but it all of a sudden it's like you can't fake the nutrition that is going to be inside.
That's the principle. If we do this totally open source, if all the data is in the commons, if any scientist anywhere can look at the reports and look at the calibration and look at how this thing's engineered, it's not black boxed, it's not controlled by a company for profit, it's all open. So this is in the commons. And if we do it honestly and enough honorable people look at it and they say this is true, then we, the people, have a standard that we trust and we can coordinate around. I think the potential is quite significant to.
Totally. I mean, you've been because you're in beta phase at the moment, right? And you've done 1 year of analysis. Is that correct so far? This project is a big project. There's a couple steps. And we're, a fairly small NGO, educational organization. So we said, we're good at like, how do farmers work with soil, or gardeners? Like, we're really good at explaining how to do that because that's sort of our core competency. But we're not coders. We're not, software engineers. We're not hardware engineers. We're not scientists. And so to really do this thing properly, we need to bring in some allies. And so we, created this thing called a Real Food Campaign. And we said, we need to bring in some allies to do this broader project. And we identified 3 core things that we need to do. One is to build the tool. We need to actually build a spectrometer that can work and can be used by a consumer and will cost the amount of money that a consumer can afford. Like, A, you got to build the thing. B, you got to figure out what quality is, because nobody's actually defined the variation of nutrient levels. Like, what is the level of nutrients in a really poor quality carrot and in a really high quality carrot, and what's the spectrum in between? Nobody's looked, at least in the open literature. Maybe some company somewhere, or some governmental agency, some military or NASA or somebody like that has looked, but we can't find anywhere in the public literature data about the variation in nutrient levels. So before we calibrate a machine that says, this is in the 20th percentile, this is in the 80th percentile, we have to identify what the 20th and 80th percentiles are. So that's step 2. And then step 3 is we want to understand what causes that variation. Soil type, fertility program, management practices, variety, microbiome, weather patterns. We want to be able to support growers of any scale globally in identifying what the things are that they're doing that are most destructive and how they can least expensively, shift their management practices to get better results. Yeah. So so you're working from the consumer level as well, like being able to use it, to read it, but also if this shifts the system, all these farmers needing the information to help get the nutrients, you want to know exactly, the
last thing you want to do is have farmers bring their crops to the market and have the market say, we don't want them. Right? We're farmers. Yeah.
The farmers work hard already.
So we want to support farmers. Like, they've been hearing use chemicals and use tillage and use these practices by product for decades. They've lost a lot of the perhaps indigenous understandings and ways. So, it is only responsible that we do our best to understand how they can change things positively and support them freely. That's the core work of the organization. I mean, we've basically said, from our collective understanding, these seem to be basic principles, and we've gone out and we've taught a lot of courses, and people respond well, and their crops respond well. And so, but when the scientists say, show me your data to prove that this is what caused that, I'm like, I can't, because nobody's done it. None of you scientists have actually pulled all this stuff together. So anyway, build a tool, figure out what quality is, figure out what causes it. That's been our sort of like 3 legs of the Real Food Campaign stool. 2017, we built the first generation of this meter, engineered it and sort of released it at our annual conference at the end of the year. 2018, we started going into manufacture and building them as well. We also built a lab, and we started running samples of crops. We just did 2 crops in 2018, carrots and spinach, and we did about 1,000 samples of the 2. And we found variations that were, I think, between 300% and 1,800%, depending
I've got
on
the some of those graphs just here.
Yeah, exactly.
Carrots were amazing.
Well, those are antioxidants and polyphenols, right? So there's minerals, calcium and potassium and phosphorus and zinc, and let's see, so that's 6 to 1 on calcium. So the best carrot had 6 times as much calcium in it as the worst carrot. That we found. And copper, you can just scroll there. That's 8 to 1. The best carrot had 8 times as much copper as the worst carrot.
It's amazing.
15 to 1. So it's not like 50% more or 20% more. It's not like, this has a, less than double. It's 8 times more. And that's the variation. And then when we look at the flavor compounds, the health-giving compounds, the antioxidants and polyphenols, it was 75 to 1 or 200 to 1.
200 to 1. That just blew my mind.
That's absolutely ridiculous. But you've had carrots that taste amazing. And
I was going to say, I've had those carrots that taste like one of the 200.
and you are an animal, right? You're hardwired with that ability to sense nutrient levels. And that's the fact. Animals, have this ability with their really sophisticated nutrient monitoring device, their nose and their tongue, to see what's good for them and what's not. And we are still animals. We do still have those tools inbuilt. Well, we lost our instinct. It's not true.
Yeah. So it's so funny. I was talking to Chef Cynthia Louise. She's an amazing whole food chef in one of the podcasts. And we talked about that. We talked about, as humans, we can get so caught up with, I've got to take a calcium supplement. I've got to take this. But our bodies are the ability, it knows what it needs. And we've forgotten. We get so caught up with advertising and marketing and it's confusing for the consumer. But if we come back to flavor, we've all bitten into a tomato that just tastes like water, and then that one that someone was growing, and the smells and the aroma, and you just cut it and eat it raw like an apple. Like it's so different, and that's the key. Like we don't realize, it was a bit of a
so simple. It's so simple. Like we already have everything we need to know to know. But the fact is, a lot of people haven't been exposed to a tomato that has flavor or a carrot that has flavor, because we've, for a couple of generations now, a lot of people in the sort of, suburban and urban environments have never been on a farm and picked something fresh out of the garden and eaten it. If you've never tasted a peach off of a tree, and you've only had those things that come in the grocery store that are hard and then they're pulpy, you have no idea what a peach could be, right?
And that's probably why some people don't even like fruit or veggies, because they're like, man, it doesn't
because
taste
the only things they've ever eaten have tasted bad, and they're animals and they know better. They're like, that's not good. That's not good. I don't like, you shouldn't. You're an animal. You know better.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's, I remember being barefoot next door to the neighbor. I think they were Italian or something. And I was, walking through their little tomato patch. And I remember we pulled it off and we just ate it as a kid, like an apple. And I just still remember every now and then, I've got tomatoes at the moment, and the leaves, they're just so aromatic. And it's it's exciting when you smell that,
You're vitalized, and it makes a deep impression on you. And so, our thought is, like, let's, engage the mind and the science with the meter. I call it a shiny object, right? People like little shiny objects, and it's through which you can tell a story of, like, oh my God, this is amazing. Through which, and then if we start to get these things out there. So I'll finish the timeline, what we're at. So 2018, we did the first 2 crops, and we showed some of those slides. 2019, last year, we did about 6 crops. So we added cherry tomatoes and kale and lettuce and grapes, I think. And we haven't released that data yet, but it's coming out very, very soon. And this year we're doing 20 crops. So we're, adding apples and blueberries and potatoes and beets and oats and wheat and, really trying to sort of flesh out the spectrum of squash and leeks and Asian greens and all kinds of stuff. So we can continue to identify the variations so we can build the calibration for the tool. And as well, this year, we started it last year, but this year especially, we're working to document all of the environmental conditions that the crops grew in. And so we're going to have almost 4,000 samples of crops that come in with the top 4 inches of soil and the next 4 inches of soil and all the historical management practices. And we're going to assess the soil next to the crop so we can really begin to connect biological activity and organic matter and minerals and management and flavor and all this kind of stuff.
Awesome. And so people can, I know when we were doing the soil advocacy training, they said, you can get involved. You can be one of these people that can get one of these machines sent out and actually do samples. Is that's obviously still what people can do, right? To help you out?
Well, so you can buy one of these things. Actually, right now we sold out of our first batch, and the pieces are coming back from China for the next batch now. So
can you get them overseas for those people that are listening?
They are in 20 countries and 5 continents. The first batch it went out.
Fantastic. That's good news for all my Australian people that are listening and everywhere around the world, but also for myself here.
In Australia, New Zealand. We got a nice little node there of Australia, New Zealand.
Oh, great. And Bali, so that's the next. I don't
think we have any in Bali. No, I don't think any in Bali is third one.
I'll be the first.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so so where we're at right now with this is this is a first generation tool. I want to just really emphasize the fact that we're a nonprofit educational organization. We're do everything on donations. There's no investment. We're not a company. There's no ROI for an investor. So all the work we're doing with the lab and the data collection and the algorithms and the engineering and everything else it's open source. So if you want to build one of these things, you just go to our website and the specs are there. You can build one yourself. That's sort of the framework that we're operating from. All the data is open. All the engineering is open. We want to hold that standard for this process. So right now the ordering is shut down on the web, but probably by August it'll be turned back on again and you can order one. The issue, so the way we've been basically building calibrations with the data we've been collecting in the lab, and with the crops that we've done so far, with the 6 crops we did last year. Right now, if you use this, if you would go to the grocery store, it's got, I think what they say is between 0.62 and 0.7 on the R squared, which doesn't mean anything for people who don't know statistics. No. But that that basically means it will. I mean, the level of calibration we've gotten to now is if you flashlight at a carrot, it'll tell you, in the top third, middle third, or bottom third.
Okay, yeah.
And we have between 62 and 70% confidence that that's correct.
Okay.
So 2/3 of the time, it'll give you the right answer for which third you're in. So we're not this is the 85th percentile. We don't have that level of nuance. And this is a first generation tool. And so it looks like to actually have a scientific instrument as opposed to a tool, which is nice, but you really want a scientific instrument. Another level of engineering is necessary. So we are doing that now.
I heard, I don't know if I made this up in my head, or is it something that you eventually want to connect to an app or something, or I don't know if I made that up in my, I didn't.
No, right now, this the way it works is this is Bluetooth to a smartphone.
Right.
And
great.
So you actually, to make it work, you actually have to press the button on your smartphone.
Okay.
And that's light to flash, and then the information comes back and it spits out the reading on your phone.
Fantastic. So well, I'm
right now.
Yeah, I mean, this tool, this is one of the reasons why I wanted you on there. I just think this is revolution. This is it's a big word. Revolutionizing the food system. That's and it empowers us as the consumer to finally, because, there's people that can go and move to being healthy, but if they're constantly buying their fruits and veggies from a source that is unfortunately not, following certain practices, then it's not producing fruit and vegetables that are really giving the nutrients that person needs, then, that is, it's really disappointing, and they're still wondering why they're not 100% healthy. This is going to shift and change that.
The thing is, people do realize that what you eat affects who you are, and that after a couple decades or more of eating not excellently, your body starts to fall apart, and you realize, like, okay, so I need to do a better job, and I'm going to eat fruits and vegetables because that's natural, and then a lot of them don't taste good. They, like, the spinach leaves, like, skin on your teeth, and the kale is bitter, and the carrots are just like, they're repugnant, and you make your shake and you want to drink it, and it just doesn't taste good going down.
No.
You're an animal. That's your body telling you it's not good. And we trick ourselves with fat, sugar, and salt, with processed products. We trick our taste buds, but, a lot of potatoes are pretty bland. A good potato is an amazing thing. But what you get in the store is not always that good, even if it's certified organic. So basically that's the idea, is that people make empowered decisions for themselves, which also facilitates carbon sequestration and, the capacity to really sequester enough carbon to turn climate change around.
That's a whole nother
point. But if we ate well, the climate would be healed in short order.
I know,
that's details. Like, is there this
no brainer
thing? And
it's just turning the ship so that we can start to align and just watching the human health improve, watching the environment improve, watching, it's one of the most simplest things we can do. Yes, there's lots of things that's eliminating plastic and all that kind of stuff, but this one thing of shifting the food system to regenerative agricultural practices that produce these highly nutrient dense foods will have such a ripple effect. So just, I know you could talk for hours about the actual basic principles for plants to be highly nutrient dense. Can you sort of summarize that? What are the main things that people who are growing their own backyard veggie gardens, what are the things they have to look for?
Yeah, or do differently. Let me just finish this last point. I think you had a question about how people can get engaged and if they buy a tool.
Yes.
Just to finish that thought, because I think, if people are interested, we should 100%. Give them a way to plug in and a realistic understanding of the timeline. I think when you did that course with Kiss the Ground, we directed people to the realfoodcampaign.org website and said, if you're interested in being a citizen scientist, sign
cool
up.
Name. Citizen scientist. I love it.
And what we're doing, 3/4 of our samples of crops are coming from farms where we're getting all the management data and the soil to look at everything together. 1/4 of the crops are coming from grocery stores and farmers markets. And so
right.
What we're trying to do is say to people, okay, you live in Detroit, let's go to, the fancy grocery stores and the bodegas, the ones that, don't, where food is less expensive or where it's available to sort of the people who have less money. And let's just sample, let's do like, we're going to do Detroit this week. We're going to send in 100 samples of crops to the lab, and we're going to identify variation in the supply chain at these different grocery stores. What is the variation? And so we're doing that right now. I think we did Detroit, and now we're doing Newark, and then we're going to do Oakland, and then we're going to do Kansas City. And so we're working our way, through major metropolitan areas across North America. We need people to be the person in that city to go to the 10 stores and buy the crops and send them into the lab. So there's
right now, just people in the US, just for my listeners who can actually get involved in that at this point.
The issue is, where are you sending the crops to? And so you have to send them to a lab. And
right.
if you're sending them to a lab in the US from Australia, the amount of time it's going to take to get there, and the logistics with food, and it's so we do have our first international lab setting up in Europe, in France.
Okay, great.
We are going to have people sending in things from not just France, but Belgium and England and Denmark and things like that.
Awesome.
There have been various conversations with people down under both Australia and New Zealand about setting up a lab there. We haven't gotten it off the ground yet. We're a nonprofit. What's that?
I said that's great to hear. I mean, it does, as you say, it's a nonprofit. It takes a bit of time to establish these things.
It takes money, really. And if somebody says this is important and I've got some money to put in, great. If somebody says this is important, why aren't you serving me? We're like, because we don't have money to serve you. So anyway.
Can people donate if they want to help? Like, if this is something that they can also see the change that it can make, people can donate. Go to bionutrient.org and
we've got a donate page. It's not
fantastic.
Like big and obvious. You actually have to look to figure out how to give us money.
And if people go and buy these, even if it's what did you say? What level stage is that one on that you can actually buy?
You can't right now because we're sold out. We took it off the website. They will be available in a month.
In a month. So buying that also helps support it as well.
We do have a margin of like about $50. So,
okay, good. So a little bit. So, but donating is obviously.
You can take it around and show people and build buzz, and exactly. It's grassroots awareness raising. It's shifting the consciousness. So
exactly.
And then we can go to how to grow plants well. So I've been teaching this course I call Principles of Biological Systems. How did nature design it to work? How does life work? And I don't like to use labels like regenerative or organic or permaculture. I say, we're basically trying to be as humble as we can about nature's model. And so what are those principles and how can you tune into them? And so I do I call it a 12-hour stand-up show, which is basically, that's how we built the organization, was doing these 2-day courses. And so I would just go to some farm or some group or whatever. I've been to a lot of places teaching these courses, and it's a deep conversation with people about where they're at and what their understandings are and what their issues are. So those are available on YouTube for free if people want the deep dive. I'll give you the short answer now, but if you want, that's freely available as a part of our principle of our organization. So I said before that plants have green leaves, and in those leaves they make sugar, and the sugar is in nature injected down through the stems, through the roots, into the soil to feed microbes, the bacteria and the fungi that are the gut flora of the plant. And they are the ones who digest the soil, actually digest the atmosphere, and feed the plant all the nutrients it needs. And that's nature's model. That's how we've been able to have, forests and everything else growing without fertilizer, is because nature has that model. So I say that, the bottom of the food chain is the microbes in the soil, and it's really them that we want to be ensuring have an environment where they can flourish. And so I don't particularly care whether it's a carrot or a cucumber or an apple tree or oats or garlic or echinacea. They all work the same way. The plant is in the middle of the food chain. The bacteria and the fungi are at the bottom of the food chain. So if we ensure that the bottom of the food chain is flourishing, we can, take a nap, go swimming. You shouldn't have to work in the field because nature's doing the work for you. So
they're the little farmers.
That's your crew, and you hook them up and give them what they need, and they just go about their way. And indigenous cultures didn't work so hard because they work smart. They knew how to, have a light touch to create the environment where the food flourished, and you shouldn't have to work all the time, right?
Exactly.
So what do you do to maintain an environment where the microbes flourish? What do they need? They need air to breathe. So if your soil's tight, they'll asphyxiate. If you can't reach your hand into the soil, or as far as you can reach your hand into the soil, is probably as far as air is able to move. And so if for whatever reason the soil is tight, that needs to be addressed. So which is why oftentimes farmers do tillage in the spring, is because the soil is more like dirt. But nature doesn't do that. Nature keeps herself covered. So if you look into nature where it's flourishing, you don't ever see bare soil. You always see some layer of cover, some, straw, leaves, green material, etc. So if you keep the soil covered, that actually functions as food for the microbes, and it facilitates basically aeration. So maybe you want to use a yeoman's plow or something initially to sort of crack open the deep subsoil compaction. That may be strategic depending on your scale, but or using a what are those called?
I can see that in my head, but I can't remember the name either. One of those things with the fork thing.
Brain fart. You do need to get air in because they need to breathe. The next thing is water. You must maintain moisture. And again, keeping the soil covered is a really great way to maintain moisture. Wherever the soil dries out, then the soil life dies, then the plant's not being fed, then it starts to, sacrifice its bottom leaves and become susceptible to infestation and disease. So air and water, are foundational pieces of this puzzle. And
water without chemicals, because there's a lot of people that you water the hose with it's got chemicals in it that can kill the microbes, right?
Very specifically, if you're using city water or town water that has come from a plant that puts chlorine or fluorine in it, those are designed to kill microbes. The reason they put the chlorine in the water is to kill bacteria. So if you're watering your garden or your seedlings in their little trays or your house plants with chlorinated water, you're basically giving your microbes, you're giving your plants a antibiotic.
Yeah.
Basically to kill bacteria. That's for. So
anti-life.
Yes, very good point. Details. So how do you get rid of that? So there's a whole long story about how you get the chlorine out of your town water. But so air and water are foundational. Food, which is, in the case of when the plants have green leaves, that would be the sugar coming down. But in the times of the year when you don't necessarily have green leaves feeding the soil, then you want to have something on the soil surface, dry leaves, cover crops, straw, hay, wood chips. Basically, you want to be able to ensure that there's food for the microbes present on the soil 12 months of the year. If you're planting, we plant in April or May, and if we have bare soil for 2 months before that, even though the crops aren't growing, the microbes are still there in the soil. And if they don't have anything to eat and they starve to death, then when you put the plants in, they get no gut flora. So, it's really rudimentary: air, water, food. So just think about it from the perspective of the microbes and do they have these things they need? The final two that I talk about are minerals. So in many cases, depending on how the soil has been treated over the past 20, 50, 500, 5,000 years, 5 million years, depending on where you are, different elements will become deficient in the soil and have become deficient. So things like, boron and molybdenum and sulfur, say they're all anions, which means basically that if there's not good organic matter structure in the soil, when it rains, they get leached out. So, you just aren't going to have sufficient levels of boron or sulfur or molybdenum in a lot of soils, full stop, because they've been abused historically. And so it's not hard to address those deficiencies. You need 5 pounds of boron in an acre for all of your plants and all of your microbes to have everything that they need. So it doesn't mean you have to constantly add fertilizer year after year after year, but addressing these mineral deficiencies, manganese and cobalt and molybdenum and a lot of these things, you just need a couple pounds in an acre. But if you don't have them because of what historically has happened, then that biological process will be broken. I use the example of cobalt at the center of vitamin B12. You need to have cobalt to have B12. 80% of the soil microbes need B12 to exist. So if you don't have cobalt in your soil, you can add all the compost tea you want, but the microbes are going to die because they don't have B12.
Fascinating. Yeah. That's a really good point.
And then the final piece is the microbes themselves.
Yeah.
And if you are, if you're dealing with a soil that has been mistreated, it is most likely the case that many of the families of bacteria and fungi you'd like to have there are no longer present. And so it's extremely simple and extremely inexpensive. And I generally say the most powerful thing you can do to inoculate. So procure either by making your own inoculants. There's all kinds of techniques of making your own, or you can buy them in little jars of powder of spores. But inoculating your seed, inoculating your transplants, ensuring that in that root zone, you do have a broad spectrum of microbes ready to reestablish themselves. So air, water, food, minerals, and microbes. Ensuring those things are present, in my experience, is generally sufficient to have significant levels of success with limited effort.
And from that simplicity comes, nature does the complexity of building what has to happen.
I mean, she's got this thing hooked up. Like, she's got it, right? Yeah. I mean, give her what she needs and get out of the way. Stop screwing with things.
Yeah, like, don't try and be a chemist and replace the
Yeah, exactly. It's really, really easy to take worn out land and revitalize it. We're not really revitalizing it. We're just bringing it what it doesn't have, and then nature does the life thing, and she will.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it's so simple when you look at it, and so for those of you listening, that's after doing soil advocacy training, I started to look at the simplicity and listen to what she's trying to say and just think of those 5 different things. That's really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. This has been absolutely so enlightening, and I've been telling everyone about the Bionutrient Meter, especially my friend who's a chef, and what an amazing concept for chefs when they're ordering their produce to make sure that their restaurants have the most flavoursome foods.
They go to the restaurant for the experience, right?
Exactly.
It tastes good. The famous chefs are like, you just got to buy the good quality food. That's not, it's not complicated.
Exactly. So for those of you who want to get involved, you can go to bionutrient.org or realfoodcampaign.org. Either of those websites will eventually get you where you need to get to. So you can become part of it. Even, in August, I think it is, I'll be putting it in my calendar to order one for myself. But yeah, thank you so much this is just a really exciting, what you're doing is, you right back to when you said at the beginning, finding how you can make a difference. This is something that would, in my opinion, I can see the shift of the food revolution happening purely just because of this machine. So it's really, really exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's my baby, it's my passion, it's my calling, but it's always nice when people tell you that what you're doing they like.
Well, the core of my concept is let's thrive with nature, and this one thing helps anyone learn how to thrive with nature. So
well, gives us all the tools, right? I mean, because a lot of people are in a situation with their life, with their work, with their family, with where they live, where they just don't have a lot of capacity to personally impact land, right? That's what we think. And yet, if you understand that with money every day, functionally, you're buying food which is grown one way or another, you have amazing power in choosing what to feed your family and what to feed yourself. And that's the thing. I mean, we talk about climate change and like changing your light bulbs and driving a Prius and all that kind of stuff. Like there's little things you can do, and then there's like complicated things you can do. And no one's talking about food because industrial ag is going to lose out on this, right? All of the chemical companies, all of the GMO companies, all of the processed product companies are going to lose out on this, because what we're going to find is that the simplest, the things grown with least inputs, that, have been processed least, that have had fewer chemicals needed, are the things that are better for you.
Yeah.
And how do I say that?
Nature always wins.
I basically made the point. We do have amazing power to affect the environment positively, and that's the thing that I feel like hopefully empowering. If
I can finish with a quote that I often reference, and I always never get off the top of my head, but it's Buckminster Fuller. It's don't spend your energy fighting a system. Create a new system that makes the original system obsolete. And this bionutrient meter is going to do that. So make sure you get on board, because this is really exciting, and I'm just very grateful that this exists. So thank you so much, Dan. But I did want to ask one bonus question, if possible. So I currently have it's not an experiment. There's a hypothesis that I've currently named it the Living Supplement Garden. And it's a garden that actually reads your body's conditions and grows the substances it needs exactly for your body, so that you will, that tomato that you're growing has grown the nutrients and microbes exactly for your condition. And so there's certain processes, and I was listening to your 1-hour introductory video this morning, and I had an aha moment, because you talked about inoculating the seed with the gut flora. And one of the processes of the Living Supplement Garden is you actually put the seeds in your mouth for 10 minutes. At least.
10 minutes, eh?
Yeah, for 10 minutes. And then you don't water it for 3 days. You leave the saliva when you're planting it, so that it's around there. With this, I don't know if you've ever heard of this concept before, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this concept of the fact that these plants, and I believe the microbes coming from your mouth as well, and the toxins, because each day you're washing your body and planting, your toxins and your microbes into the soil. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this hypothesis.
I think it was popularized. The concept was popularized through a series of books called the Ringing Cedar series. Which
it's Anastasia.
Anastasia, right, from
Russia.
Siberia. Yakut or Irkut, I can't remember what she is. Certainly indigenous. I personally had spent 3 months when I was 18 in Siberia.
Did you go and look for Anastasia? I love the book.
This was 25 years ago or something, before the books came out. I don't know if she specifically delineated the number of minutes that this.
She said a minimum of 9 minutes, which I thought was very unusual. So I just say 10.
I honestly haven't read the book. I've just had it. People have mentioned it to me numerous times.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So it makes entire sense, as I understand it, that a plant would grow for you if you connect with it. The first thing you need to understand is that we all are sentient. We all have consciousness, not just humans and animals, but plants and all kinds of things have consciousness. And if we are only believing in the physical plane, according to the physicists, we're missing 98% of reality.
Yes.
So, what the indigenous cultures said about intuition and, being able to communicate with plants and animals and things like that. If you're not too dull, you can.
Yeah.
If you're so shut down because you're out of tune because you are living in a box and looking at screens and thinking poor thoughts, then maybe you can't talk to nature because your antenna aren't tuned well.
Yeah.
But foundationally, we all have the capacity to, I believe. So certainly getting your biochemistry, your microbiome, your energy on the seed, I think as much of that is valuable on the physical plane, at least as much as the intention and the gratitude and the feeling for the plant. And I would say that, if you ever had kids, if you've raised children, if you've, anything, baby chickens, if you walk into a room and you're angry and you're yelling and you're cold, the child is going to respond one way. The dog will respond another way, the same way. The plant is also sensitive to that.
Yeah.
And if you walk into your garden and you say, how's it going today, guys? So wonderful to see you. And you sort of pet them lightly and, say, thank you for incarnating to feed me. Right? Like the way I see it is every being incarnates with a certain like general idea of what it's up to this time. And, a piglet that's born on a farm pretty much knows what its end game is. Like on some level, it already it made that agreement.
Yeah.
And so the only question is, how good of a life am I going to be able to provide for that animal or that plant as gratitude for what it's doing for me? And so, I think it's certainly, I don't think I've seen the literature. I believe that people have research to show that when they engage very closely with their plants, they do change the compounds that they put in them. So it's like, it is personalized medicine. But it's personalized medicine by working directly and deeply with nature, not by getting some processed product and a series of lab tests and everything else, right? That's just a perversion of the process. The real deep process is to be in relationship with the plants or the animals directly.
Exactly. It's I've currently got I'm, like I said, the Living Supplement Garden. I've got one box that I'm fully connecting with, and then I've got a control that's very next to it. And it's, the energy is very different. I'll be planting the seeds soon according to the biodynamic calendar. And I want to measure it. And one of the tools I want to use is the Bionutrient Meter, because I'm interested to see the difference that potentially could happen.
Beautiful.
Through that. So it's an exciting, it's a journey. And like you said, there isn't, I think there's a lot of data in Russian, but I don't speak Russian.
Я могу говорить только чуть-чуть по-русски.
Oh, you do a bit. There you go. That's amazing. So,
the Cyrillic alphabet's it's a whole process to learn it.
Wow.
For us English speakers. The thing is, like, the Russians have figured a bunch of really interesting things out, and the Germans and the Japanese, the Chinese and the French. There's a lot of these cultures that have a solid scientific tradition that have, identified things that the English speaking, world is kind of not aware of. And it's really exciting if you look at the collective wisdom of the whole planet, of all the cultures, and you can try to find integrations of it. As far as I'm concerned, we know everything we need to know to have a profoundly expansive culture and planetary, health. It's just a question of implementing it.
Exactly.
How do we drive that?
Yeah. I could talk to you for hours. There's so many levels that you've talked about here. Quantum physics, spiritual. It's all up my alley. But I just really appreciate it. I know we've gone a bit over time, so I really appreciate it. Time is precious during these days. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom from the 30 plus years that you've been involved in this, and for what you're doing for the planet. I really think it's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Really, it's always wonderful to be able to speak to people who are on the same wavelength and have a opportunity to do that.
Hey, if you enjoyed listening to my podcast, remember to subscribe to hear more. You also have to come check out the Living Supplement Garden, a garden that reads your individual's body's condition and grows the substances it requires to move towards optimal health and potentially healing your ailments. When we align with nature, we thrive with nature. I'd love to have you join myself and others as we discover the magic of nature together and strive to heal both ourselves and our planet. Go to thrivingwithnature.com.